Hello all, this is NaveenPrabhu. Today we are going to look at the game between Donald Byrne and Robert James Fischer. This match has been featured in the Rosenwald Memorial Tournament in the Marshall Clubs at the New York City in 1956. Robert Byrne, James Fischer is also known as Bobby Fischer at the later end of his career. If you guys miss out a small trap which made by Bobby Fischer, I have just posted a link in the description box. You can check it out. Let's go into the game. The game goes into the English opening. That is, first he plays his knight to f3 and later he plays the move c4. Here Bobby Fischer continues his plan because Bobby Fischer always develops his knight to f6 and pushing the pawn to g6 and financiating his bishop on g7 and then castle on the king side. That is his usual strategy. Here also he continues the same strategy. Let me show you the move orders here. He goes for knight to f6 and he pushes the pawn to c4. That is the English opening on the board. Now he just continues his plan of financiating his bishop on g7 square and he just develops his queenside pieces and he also claims some space in the center, but Bobby Fischer don't worry about that. He just going with his plan of castling on the king side. He financiates his bishop on g7 and Byrne just pushes his pawn to d4, claiming more space in the center. As you see, the e4, d4, c5 and b5, sorry about that, that is e5, d5, c5 and b5 squares are covered by the two pawns on d and c4. Bobby Fischer don't worry about climbing the center. He just castles here and he just develops his lost piece on the queen side. Now Bobby Fischer just climbs the center by playing the move d5, thinking of some capturing and trading happens in the center, but Byrne avoids it by playing the move queen to b3. So Bobby Fischer captured the pawn here and Byrne recaptures and it just puts a pressure on the c7 pawn. So Bobby Fischer just moves the pawn forward and he just pushes his pawn to e4 and climbing the center. Bobby Fischer just develops his knight here, planning off some attacks on the queen by playing the move knight to b6. He just puts the rook against the queen by playing the move rook to d1. As of now, this move has not been reached earlier or after the game has been played. As of now, this is the new move of the game. Now Bobby Fischer just attacks the queen by playing the move knight to b6. Now Byrne just puts his queen forward, just pushes the queen forward to c5 and Bobby Fischer just develops his bishop to g4 square. And here Byrne puts his bishop to g5. Actually this is not that great move because it just gives some advantage for black here, because Bobby Fischer has played the move knight to a4. This is the only advantage for black to continue the position. If he plays some other move, it will just equalize the game, but this is a blunder. So Bobby Fischer just spots it and plays the move knight to a4. Here he can't just capture the knight because here Bobby Fischer will just capture the pawn on e4 and it forces him to counter-attack the queen here. And Bobby Fischer can just move and he have to trade the rook, get the rook and lose the queen here. And he can also take the knight here. You have to do this in this position because there is no better continuation in this position. You have to accept the rook and knight for his queen in this position. But in the game actually he didn't capture the knight here. He didn't capture the knight. He just pushes his queen to a3 and now Bobby Fischer captures his knight and he captures with the pawn with this pawn. And now Bobby Fischer gets the pawn on e4. He didn't think of losing the pawn on e7, which actually looks like losing the rook on f8, but that is not true, because if he captured the pawn here, actually in the game he captures the pawn here, Bobby Fischer just puts his queen to b6, and now we have no time to capture the rook here, because if we capture the rook here, Bobby Fischer can just capture with this bishop and asking the queen where the queen is just going, because the queen has not so much space to go in this position. The queen may come to b3, and Bobby Fischer can just capture the pawn on c3. If the queen captures the knight here, that is, queen captures c3, Bobby Fischer just can pin the queen with his king by playing the move bishop to b4, which instantly loses his queen here. That's not great. So Byrne didn't capture the rook here. Instead, he feels that his rook is doing nothing in this position and his bishop was just sleeping in this position. He wants to activate his pieces. So he goes for some piece activity. So he develops his bishop to c4, planning out some castling ideas. But in this position, Bob Fischer just captured the knight here, because if the queen captures here, we can just pin the queen like this. He can just pin the bishop like this, and he will lose this bishop. So that will be a fair trade, because he gives the knight here, we will take the bishop here. If he plans to save the bishop here, like playing the move queen to e3, we can just capture the knight here and you have to capture back, and we can just put our bishop and attack the bishop on e7. Here you need to capture the bishop, and we will just capture the queen here, and it is good for black to play in this position. The advantage is good for white, but it is not easy to defend this position because this rook is not active till now. Only active pieces are both the bishops. But before the activation of the rook, there is a major advantage for black in this position. But actually this doesn't happen in the game. In the game, Byrne just plays the move bishop to c5 and attacks the queen. And now Bobby Fischer just gave him a check, that is, saving his f8 rook here by playing the move rook to e8 check, and just the king moves. Now actually Bobby Fischer has only one winning move in this position. I give you a few seconds. If you try it by yourself. I hope you have found this move, that is bishop to e6. This is the only winning move in this position. Here Bobby Fischer have to sack his queen in this position, because that is the only move to keep his advantage in this position. If he moves his queen, he will just loses his knight here. So you have to play this move. And there are 3 continuations in this position. I will show you one by one. If the queen captures the knight here, we can just capture the bishop on c5. As you see, the d4 pawn is pinned to the bishop here. So the pawn cannot capture the queen. If he captures, we can just capture the queen here. And now you can count the material. It is equal in this position. And this rook is doing nothing. This is hardly getting some time to get out. So we don't have to worry about that rook. It's a good advantage for black to play in this position. But there is also another continuation, that is bishop captures e6. We can also capture, we can just give the check here, and it is a mate in 6 in this position. I will show you the move orders right now. He can't come here because this will lead to a checkmate. So you have to go there, or just give up the bishop and you have to go there, and we will give this check, and the king have to come here. This will be a check, and the king goes in. This is a check here with the support of the knight. So rook have to capture, and this is a mate. This mate is also known as muthered mate. But in the game, it doesn't happen. In the game, he just accepts the queen sacrifice. So Bobby Fischer just captures the bishop here, gives a check in this position, pushes the king to g1 square, as the rook on h1 does not move in this game till now, and that is also blocked with his own king. It has some difficulties to came out in this position. Now Bobby Fischer doesn't capture the rook here. If he loses the queen, we will just capture so much material we are getting in the position. But that's the beauty of this game. Bobby Fischer doesn't capture the rook here. He just give him a check, and king comes to f1, and he captured this pawn and give him a check, and it goes back, and he just rearranging his knight and putting it back to the c3 square. He just comes back, and the king goes in to the g1. Now Bobby Fischer doesn't capture the knight. First he just captured the bishop here, so that the queen have to move to some other square. But queen has only less moves in this situation, because if the queen goes here, we can just give him a check, and this also the bishop threatens the queen here. You have to give up his queen in this position, so that can't be good, right? So queen can't come to b2 square yet. If he plays the queen to c1, it's a fork with the king and queen. That also not be great. He will lose the queen. He have only one more to play. He can't play this move also, because if he plays it, we can just put the rook to d8. If we have only one move, that is to capture the rook in this position, we have to give him like this check, and king comes f1, and we have to give this check. We have to go back, and we will capture it. We're doing this check here because we have to block the path of this rook, because that if we don't block this path, if we capture the rook, the rook can capture the black rook, and there will be a superior advantage for white in that position. So we block the rook's path in this position. Now the knight can be captured, and we can just get the knight here in this way, because the knight can't move, because the rook will be dropped if that moves, and that also leads to a checkmate in this position. Okay, but in the game he just plays the move queen to b4. He just activates the rook here. Just rook comes to a4 and attacks the queen one more time, and the queen captures the pawn on b6. Now only Bobby Fischer just captured his rook, going for some material, and now Byrne just creating some room for his king to come out, and for this rook to come out to activate in this position, because the knight and queen can't defend all the pieces in this position, trying for some advantage in the position. So Bobby Fischer just continued the game by capturing material in this position. Byrne puts his king to h2. Bobby Fischer just grabs the material in this position. He grabs the f2 pawn. Rook comes to e1 asking for exchange. Bobby Fischer accepts that, and in the meantime, before capturing the rook, he just delivers a check here. He blocks with the bishop in this position. He captured the rook in the position. Now Bobby Fischer just fixing the structure by putting the bishop on d5, and so that the pawn on c6 can't be captured, and he will soon push the pawn to b5, and he can fix the structure in the queen side. And the king side, he have no attacking chances, because the knight and queen has no combination of attacks in this situation, because the f7 square is guarded well, and h7 square is not that weak to attack that easily. So only the black is attacking in this position. White is just watching the amazing attack happening in the position. Okay, let's go to the game. Continue like the knight comes back to f3, and Bobby Fischer moves his knight to e4, thinking of moving his king and giving a check on d6 square and activating his bishop to come for an attack. Byrne just moves his queen to b8, so Bobby Fischer don't want to lose his pawn on b7. He pushes it to b5 as I told you earlier. Now he just pushes the pawn to h4 in this position, and Bobby Fischer don't want any advancement in the pawn because as I told you the king is quite safe in this position. If he pushes the pawn to h5 and we capture means that it gives some attacking chances for the white in this position. So Bobby Fischer fixes the structure by playing the move h5 himself, and he goes for knight to e5 move, and Bobby Fischer plays the move king to g7. As I told you earlier, the bishop can jump into the d6 square because the king and queen are in the same diagonal, and this can't be good for white in this position. So he just plays the move king to g1. Now Bobby Fischer just gave him this check, and actually this is a mate in 8 position. If the king goes here, the king goes to h1, we can just give him a check. This is actually mate in 3. We can just give him a check and it comes up, and we can deliver this check, and the king have to come up in this position or go down to h1. Both results in this checkmate, that is bishop captured g2. This is a checkmate in this position. If the king goes to h2, this is actually a mate in 8 in this position. That is, we need to play this move, giving this discovery check, that is knight to f3 check, which also attacks the knight here, and also he can't capture back because the rook pins the pawn on g2. So we have to move his king here. We can just deliver this rook check, and the king comes up, and we give this knight check. If the king goes down, we can just place the move bishop to f2, and the king has no squares in this position. He have to move somewhere his queen or knight in this position. If he does, we can just give him this check, and he have to move his king here. We can just deliver this checkmate. But in the game, he just puts his king to f1, because if he goes to that corner of the board, he knows that he will be checkmated in few moves. But king to f1 just puts him a checkmate in just 5 moves. Let me show you what happens in the game. Bobby Fischer just gave him this check, and the king comes to e1. It's looking like just the king walk, like it started in the move king to e1, and it goes to f1, g1, and it oscillated in this position f1, g1, and then he finally goes to h3 and then comes back and is walking in this direction. Let me show you, it's interesting to see. Now he gives him the check on b4, and the king comes to d1, and he gives him another check by playing the move bishop to b3. The king comes to c1. Now he just delivers the check with the move knight to e2. The king goes to b1, and he gives knight to c3 check. The king comes to c1, and now Bobby Fischer checkmated him by playing the move rook to c2. That is a checkmate in this position. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this video, hit the like button. And one more thing, that is, this game is also known as Game of the Century. This game played when Bobby Fischer was just 13 years old. It is really amazing because when you are just 13 years old, he just sacks his queen and play this amazing combination, means that is really amazing to watch. Keep supporting this channel. Thanks for supporting this channel. Subscribe to this channel for more contents like this. Okay, bye bye. See you in the next video. This is NaveenPrabhu signing off.